Well, welcome those that are here in person and those joining us virtually to our, what is this, October. This is our October Nonprofit Executives Council meeting, and our first hybrid, I believe. No, we had one 2 months ago, hybrid exec meeting, and happy to have another one, an opportunity to do this both virtually and in person. And we're very happy to have Tony LaNasa back. LaNasa? Back here again today he's a managing principal with the Columbus HW&Co, CPAs Advisors. They have certainly partnered with us numerous times, and both us and the Delaware Chamber numerous times to provide some great presentation material. And Tony's back here to talk to us today about fraud prevention, detection, and cybersecurity, which is something that even as of yesterday, actually, our phone systems are voice over IP, and apparently those are just as hackable as anything else. And we actually lost our ability to have anyone reach out to us for more than a day via our phone number. So it's real, it's happening, and it can happen to anybody. But in terms of fraud, and like Tony has said here, fraud has increased during the pandemic, and the expectation is it will keep increasing with nonprofits having less people and resources to combat it. This session will discuss occupational fraud prevention and detection techniques you can implement now and how your organization can reduce the risk of cyber fraud in the workplace. And with that, I will hand it over to Tony.
All right. Can everyone hear me? Is this good? Everyone's good? Yep. All right. Good afternoon.
Cheryl, can you hear Tony?
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. So this is my third time I'm doing a session here with the group here. So hopefully there's some people that recognize me with doing this. But I think the last one was what, like 5-6 months ago, probably, or somewhere around. I talked about all the stimulus relief, PPP, and all that good stuff. One quick thing on that, if anyone has not looked into the employee retention credit, you may want to look into the employee retention credit, because you may be able to qualify potentially. The one thing that I hear from my clients as well, I looked at the revenue reduction I had, and I didn't have either a 20% reduction in 2021 or a 50% reduction in 2020. The reductions are a little different with qualifications, but there's also a qualification related to partial suspension of operations. And a lot of my clients say, well, I didn't really suspend operations. Like we kept working kind of through this whole thing. But if you really look into it and dig into it, a lot of my clients are qualified. And there's reasons why, there's a lot of reasons why. But like if one of your programs was shut down because maybe it's in person, you couldn't do it in person. Again, a lot of my clients, nonprofit clients, had these big galas and fundraising events and walks, and they had to shut all that down. Potentially, that could qualify you for this employee retention credit. And then as long as you qualify, you can get, I would say, significant dollars per employee related to this credit. And the IRS would just cut you a check for it. And the good thing about it, you think about it, they say it's a tax credit. Well, nonprofits, normally don't benefit from tax credits because they don't pay taxes. However, it's a payroll tax credit. So it's not income tax credit, it's payroll tax credit. So that's why a lot of nonprofits actually can benefit from this credit. So that's off subject. Go ahead.
Actually, I want to say, because of your presentation on this, the chamber itself looked into this, and we received over $20,000 in ERC credit from that. So thank you again, actually, for the heads up on that. So I do strongly recommend it if you're on this call and hearing Tony's voice to take a look with that with your CPA.
And yeah, if you need some help with it, or if you have questions too, reach out to me too, email, call. I'm glad to help anyone with it. So, and you actually amend your 941, your payroll tax returns to get the credit. Okay, so the process right now, did you get the money, Matt?
We just got it, this week.
So how long did it take?
It took a month or so.
So I'm hearing now, because the IRS is so backlogged right now, it's taking up to 9 months. If you file a 941 or amended 941 now with the credit, it's actually could be taking up to 9 months to get the actual check back. which is unfortunate. Now there is a way you can actually, if you do qualify for the credit, you calculate your credit. There's actually a way to get the money now where all you have to do is then just going forward, all you do is reduce your payroll taxes that you pay in based on the credit that you are qualifying for, right? So say if you qualify for a $10,000 credit, you just reduce your payroll taxes going forward, your forward pays for those payroll taxes. And then the next quarter that you actually file the 941 is when you actually say, okay, well, I reduced my credit of $10,000 by $10,000 payroll taxes. And you actually file that on your 941 going forward. So you can actually get the money in-house right now and not wait for the check. So, all right. So I have 50 minutes. I'm not going to go over. I'll keep on time. If there's questions, I can answer some questions. The session today, we talk about cybersecurity. And normally this type of session, I'm actually doing it with someone else that is the real expert in cybersecurity. He's our chief compliance officer at the firm. So he really takes on that piece of cybersecurity, and then I take on the fraud side. So I just want to mention that, like, if there's questions that come up with cybersecurity, I may not be able to answer everything, but I can always take it back to, his name is Mike Schaffner. I can always take it back to him, and he can maybe answer some questions that come up on the cybersecurity side. Sound good? Want to jump into this? All right. So, you want to?
Go ahead.
I can do it. I can do it. Sounds good. All right. So we'll talk about fraud risks, and we'll talk about cyber fraud. Okay. You don't talk about fraud without talking about the fraud triangle. Okay, so we'll talk about that, what that means, the 3 items within there. We'll speak on some prevention techniques and fraud detection techniques at the end as well. This stuff is not rocket science. It's stuff that hopefully every organization has processes in place to actually do that. If you don't, maybe you should consider some of that. So just kind of go through there again. If there's questions that come up, just let me know. So I don't know if anyone can, people can probably unmute.
They can unmute. Sorry, I should have said that. So if you have any questions, of course, during this, you feel free to unmute, or I'm watching the chat as well. So,
but you don't have to answer either. Cheryl can answer follow here. But so what's keeping you up at night? And you could probably answer all 4 is keeping you up at night. I'm hearing the staff workload retention is a real tough issue right now with a lot of businesses, and that's across all industries, including nonprofits. That's probably number 1 on a lot of people's minds. The remote work dynamic, I think, is something out there. Just our firm, we have this dynamic where we all went remote back last year, and then a lot of the young people don't want to come back to the office, right? So now we're trying to understand, okay, well, how can we be flexible with that, along with trying to develop those young people as well at the same time? Because it's a little bit more difficult being remote and having that interaction where you can just, if you're in the office, you can just walk down the hall and just talk to somebody or show somebody on paper what you're doing and everything as well. So that's a kind of a dynamic we're dealing with. And I know at my firm, we have this hybrid approach right now that we're doing, which people are doing some days in the office, some days at home, and working through that a little bit. So it's one of those working processes that every business is working through. So Cheryl, what's your number 1, you think, on here?
Retention.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll talk about cyber fraud a little. We're going to talk about remote work a little. I know it sounded like a lot of the nonprofits here in the area are working in the office. So, that we can sort of not really talk much about that, but we can. And then also internal controls is very important with businesses right now as well. So on the cybersecurity side, we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about, as Matt was talking about, saying that occupational fraud. There's 2 items in occupational fraud that we'll speak on, and misappropriation of assets, which is like theft, embezzlement, assets, cash leaving your business. But people also don't think about financial statement fraud as well, which is, a lot of people say, just cooking the books, right? Okay, well, my numbers are so down because of the pandemic, and I couldn't have this big gala this year and get everyone together and get all these donations in, and we did it all virtual, and it was half. So, I don't want to look bad to my board. I don't want to look bad to the outsiders, the stakeholders. So I'm gonna manipulate my revenue a little bit, and that's what is called cooking the books. So you see a lot of that. Some of the factors you can see here, shifting of resources, the furloughs, job cuts. At this point right now, you don't see that. All the businesses are trying to hire now. Obviously, the remote work and that dynamic with working from home, and then less supervision because of that. Then, right? You don't have someone overseeing you, and then that perception then with the person maybe in the business office at home, cutting checks or doing some work at home. Then that perception's out there that you have that oversight, that someone's over your shoulder looking at you. So some questions, businesses, should be asking and hopefully asked last year, how were the daily tasks changed with going remote potentially, or even just in business office with maybe job cuts or furloughs. What are physical constraints in the business? What's out there, thinking of that, prevention of theft of business assets, like just thinking well, how can an insider steal my cash, the business cash? Or how can an outsider do that, right? And there's a lot out there that's happening with that. Are you communicating? Because maybe potentially people are kind of scattered right now. Are you still communicating, the ethics and integrity? Are you communicating to your employees about, just overall fraud and so forth, and zero tolerance with that? That's very key. We'll talk several times about just education to employees. We talked about supervisors. Well, because everyone maybe potentially or some are working from home, or there's a hybrid approach, supervisors are really overwhelmed with that, because now they're doing their day-to-day and they're trying to do all these Zoom calls and phone calls and try to touch base with staff and just understand what's going on with them. So even with us as a CPA firm, we see that kind of overwhelming of the manager levels, where they can't get their day-to-day done now because they're always on these virtual stuff, and it's just difficult. And then the last thing here is a tip hotline. Okay, very important for every business to have a tip hotline. If you don't, you probably should consider one. Okay, they're not that expensive. You can contract that work out to a company that just does it exclusively. We partner with a company that's called Red Flag Reporting, and that's all they do. We're not affiliated with this group, but that's all they do is just, they have clients and they review all of the calls that come in. And then if there's a call that really probably needs to have some oversight with it, some follow up, then they actually they forward that over to someone in the company to follow up. Potentially, like if you have a compliance officer, a lot of nonprofits don't, but someone that is probably not in the business office that can review that tip. So we'll talk about why a hotline is important. And you'll see some statistics to say that's a very important item to have in the business. So do you have staff working remote currently?
Yes.
Only during quarantine.
Just with quarantine. How many employees do you have?
35.
So they're all in the office for the most part.
Yes.
And you have, Matt, you have some
Yes.
that are remote and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if there's any nods on the screen
I've
there.
seen some nods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I think that's something that is not going away. As I talked about, I think there's going to be a lot of young people that want that flexibility now. We just have to, the big word is pivot, right? We have to really understand how we can actually approach that and do business kind of like we previously did with this change in the approach. So with cybersecurity, it's all about control of the systems, right? Like who's controlling the system, who can make changes to the system. That relates to the hardware, that relates to the storage, all that stuff, right? Who is monitoring the activities? If you don't have someone internally on the IT side, who's monitoring that activity, and who's understanding those controls? That's key. If you don't have someone internally, it would be someone on the outside. The threats, there's always threats with cyber fraud, right? There's always a threat, even though you can secure your systems and have top-notch security levels. There's always a threat because the hackers are always a step ahead. So, how do you mitigate those threats? How you understand them? And then having in the back end, then having security and having policies in place. So employees either can look at these policies or again, be educated on those policies throughout, like periodically throughout the year, maybe once a year, on what our policies are related to cybersecurity. And our firm just had about a month ago, we had 3 sessions. Our compliance officer had 3 sessions just going through the policies. And it was difficult to sit there through them. It was very difficult. And you kind of get like, you're like, man, this is crazy stuff. How so we have so much security, but there's always a threat there. Someone always can get in. So it's crazy. But again, coming back to the educating employees is key. So what has changed in the kind of the environment where we are right now? Definitely your security policies have changed, most likely. You want to take a look at that. Equipment. So one of the things is, you go remote, a lot of people were using potentially their own laptops, their own desktops at home, definitely phones, using your own phones and having work email on there. How does that change the dynamic? Password rules, maybe like a couple of years ago, your password rules were like you change them every 6 months. Well, maybe you kind of need to revisit that now, just because of the hackers and fraudsters are really getting very sophisticated. Windows updates, I get frustrated with those every other day when I shut down. You get this window update and you have to stay for 5 more minutes before it to update. Obviously, very important to update that because there's a reason why they have these updates, because there's a security breach. So they're upgrading the system to combat that. So make sure you're updating all of that, Windows, all of your systems. And then back to that supervision and lack thereof, just with the environment we're in. All this, it heightens the cyber fraud and issues that we're seeing currently. We talked about like the equipment, and everyone's using their own equipment. So this is, the devices. You can see the picture here of everyone using different devices at home or just out and about, remote, things like that. How is that interplay with how you're working on the day-to-day business? The encryption and all the security levels on that, very important. Password requirements, again, we deal with these lock screens and timeouts at our firm a lot. And, there's a lot of pushback with the preparers because our system, because we have a cloud-based system, hey, it needs to time out every 15 minutes because if you leave your desk, someone can just come in and just take a look at what you're on. So we do 15 minutes, but then we get some pushback from everyone. It's like 15 minutes is just, I could just go to the restroom and then come back and then I have to log back in and it takes another couple of minutes to do it. So again, you may want to consider that as well. Just, what is your timeouts? Are they appropriate? All of that, just with the environment you're in. The remote wiping of systems and hardware. So our firm, we have a remote wipe of our phones. So if I lose my phone, I just call IT and say, you know what, I lost my phone. I have no idea where it's at. I can't find it. They wipe it clean. Now you would think that if I lose my phone, the password and all of that security to not get into it is good enough. Sometimes it's not. So just make sure if you do have work email on your phones and all that, that you have some way to wipe them, or consider that, maybe if you don't right now, consider that. And then there's just corporate data all over the place. There's so much data in the world right now. And there's fraudsters trying to get that information, either personal or business. So just be diligent with that. So, we've heard about all this, a lot of the ransomware recently. someone getting credentials, getting into a system, and then freezing the system, pulling the data out, and then saying, you know what, you have to pay me to get that information back. So there's a lot of that going around. Email phishing, wire fraud. That's external wire fraud. So just someone getting credentials on the outside, being able to log in, or having with an email, sending an email to an executive director or president, CEO saying, hey, I am, or not CEO, sending the email to controller and saying, hey, I am CEO or executive director. I need to wire 15 grand to this one account. And it's always like this urgency there and everything. Maybe the executive director is on vacation or out of town. So that controller, that person can't contact them. So they just end up just doing it. And they just don't see that money again. So I've seen that on several of my clients the last couple of years for sure. Yeah.
Gift cards, but.
Gift cards. Yep. And then you can see just some of the lapses and all of that, what could happen. So especially with nonprofits, you have a reputation in the community. You rely on donors and stakeholders a lot to actually fund your program. So reputation is very key. So if you have this fraud that hits the public, what happens to that then, right? The cost of litigation, all that, fines, disruption of business is a big key, especially with that ransomware. You can't get in your system. What do? Right? So I've heard a lot of big businesses just paying their ransom because they just want their data back. But if you think about it, if you talk to a lot of the cyber security professionals that say you don't do that, right? And then just financial losses, external, internal, all of that there's a lot of money to be had if there's a lapse. Talking about the email compromise. So, we've talked about this a little bit. You get an email, you think it's legitimate, it's not, and you do what it says. There's always some things that you can kind of look in the email and say, well, that doesn't look right. Or I don't typically wire $15,000 to an account. Why is my ED saying that? Do that now. And a lot of that too is, if you have processes already in place where there's controls in place where, okay, well, there's going to be an ACH, well, someone needs to approve that ACH. Then if ED just emails you, that's called overriding the control process. So that's even worse too. You're overriding the processes because someone's telling you, you need to do this now. Maybe what you do is you tell the ED or someone else back and say, you know what, we have a process here. Let's go through that. And it may take a few more hours, but we'll get it done. Email threats, we talked about that. This is some of the the links, and everyone's heard this. You don't click links, you don't click attachments that you don't recognize. The last item here, 48% of malicious email attachments are Office files. So just a typical Word, Excel file that you open, and there's issues with it once you open it. So if you don't recognize the email, delete it. Delete it or don't click on anything. And then if it's coming from the ED or someone else on the outside, pick up the phone, call them and say, hey, did you just send me something? I didn't really see it, or something that you don't typically send to me. I say that, it's just pick up the phone, and that may just resolve it there. The traits of some of the emails we talked about, lots of attachments, urgency, some errors in grammar and things, and lots of hyperlinks and all that. You can see here, this is an example of just an Amazon. Well, you get an Amazon email and the from is misspelled. It doesn't have the A in Amazon. And then it just says, dear client. It doesn't have dear Tony or things. And then the link, you can just looking at the link, it looks legit. It has Amazon in it. But if you hover over it, the actual address comes up and it's a completely different address, right? So that's one of the education things that you can probably tell some of your staff is if you do get this email, you get a link, before clicking on it, just hover over it and see exactly what that address is. It may not be the same thing. Also, here's an example here of just an address. So the key is the first slash, all right, in the address. So if you look at it, it's after the .com, and that address is the first slash you have in the actual address itself after the www. So, you know, the green line here, if you see it and you say, okay, well, I look at this, and you hover over the link and it says chase.com with the first slash, you can probably think that's probably an okay site, as long as Chase is actually chase.com, like JP Morgan. If it's not, then it probably wouldn't be. But if that's your typical address for that company, then that's probably okay. The second address, you can see it starts with Chase, but then the item right to the left of that first slash is this Beechwood 33. That's probably not okay, because that's where you're going to go. You're going to go to that site, that Beechwood 3333 site. So just make sure, like, if you are hovering over links or you're just looking at a link, you look at that first slash, and right to the left of that, that's where the site that's the site you're going to. Some of the timeline you can see here, you know, it takes 12 days on average to discover the issue. So, you know, there's people in your system doing what they are doing for 12 days. That's just a lot of time. You can see 36 days to actually complete an investigation, and then also 66 days to notify. So just a huge timeline here. The key to this is just, you know, try to do as much as you can up front to prevent this, right? Again, there's always threats out there, but it, you know, just do as much as you can with the resources you have. And if something happens, obviously try to mitigate that quickly. Now, some of the breach responses, you can see, you know, loss of equipment, policy violations, all these incidents are out there. Some of the mitigation here, you can see there's kind of a list here. You know, passwords, obviously. There's a huge thing about this second factor authentication right now. A lot of insurance companies are requiring a lot of companies to go to that now, especially if softwares are, you know, have that feature. So if you do have like cybersecurity insurance, your carrier might be like, you know what, how much second authentication do you have? If you don't, they may require it. So that's a big thing here. Nothing that's crazy, like making sure your inbox is cleaned up, you know, stuff like that, you know, we should be doing anyway. But you can take a look at this list and do that.
What was the last one? And is there like nonprofits encryption software? Like
We use a system called Mimecast, and it's through email. So what happens with Mimecast, I'm not sure how expensive it is, but like if a client wants to send us information through email and it's confidential or whatever, we'll send a link to them through email, and then they can use that link. It's a secure link, send the information to us. And also too, if there's a file that's very large and it's not going to get through, we can use that as well. It's called Mimecast. There's also, like, we use portals as well, where a client can just log into a portal and get information. It's all web-based, cloud-based. So there's stuff out there as well. I wouldn't think like the Mimecast is too expensive, but something to look into. So do you have cybersecurity insurance?
Insurance, I don't believe so.
So how about you?
mine. I think it might be built in as just one of the
norms.
parts. Yeah.
Yeah, so make sure you do. I think take a look at your policy. I guess maybe next time you renew, or if you get back to the office, take a look, see if you have cybersecurity insurance. You know, I think that's very important these days, just to prevent or, you know, to remediate that issue, that threat. Okay, so moving to the fraud triangle. How much time do I get?
That's 32.
So in every fraud case that you see, there's typically these three items. There's pressure. This is mainly occupational fraud. There's pressure either like on an individual or an organization. There's some pressure on them. There's opportunity to commit the fraud, meaning potentially like there's not controls or oversight, things like that. And then there's good people that do bad things. There's a lot of good people that are like, wow, like Susie was a great person. You know, she went to church every Sunday. You know, she's been here for 20 years. And then what happens is they rationalize that decision because there's so much pressure on them. And they, in their mind, they think, well, this is okay. I'll pay it back. Things like that. That's what happens when potentially there's opportunity to do that. So, you know, some of the personal pressures you can see that you typically see in fraud. You know, one of the things is living beyond means. You know, you want to live like your neighbor's living. So, you know, but you don't know what your neighbor's situation is, right? So, you know, they want to live like that. So then, you know, they don't have the resources right now. So then they have an opportunity to do it, and that's how they do it. You can see the other ones here. You know, some of the things I ask my clients is, well, how did these pressures change in the pandemic, right? I think they just got heightened significantly, right? People, you know, not having jobs, potentially, you know, with unemployment insurance running out, things like that. Now, what do they do for their family now? So that has heightened. Some of the organizational pressures. So obviously we talked about staffing issues overall. You know, people then, you know, having a workload that has increased, especially supervisors. You know, one of the items here, increasing costs, right? You know, everyone's has increased costs at this point, just overall. One of the last items here is the compliance risk. So, you know, with all the stimulus that businesses have received with PPP and everything else, there's a lot of compliance with that. There's a lot of reporting you have to go back to either SBA or Treasury or others. So what I've told my clients is, like, you have to have either someone internally that really understands the compliance, or you lean on somebody else, a CPA firm or somebody else that actually understands that compliance. Because, you know, we have a lot of healthcare clients. They received a lot of stimulus for provider relief funds and coronavirus relief funds, and there is a reporting mechanism in the back end with that. And if they don't report it properly, or if they don't report enough costs, they have to give some of that money back or all of that money back. So it's very important, and these healthcare providers need this. So, you know, you have to have, it's one of those keys is you have to have someone around you, close to you, that really understands that compliance. So you moved on for the pressures, not opportunities. So obviously this is easy. If you don't have the controls, then there's more opportunity. But if you increase controls, or if you increase segregation of duties, potentially, then your opportunity goes down. Moving that from there, then the rationalization side of it, you can see what you hear a lot from fraudsters. You know, one of the big things I'm hearing now is, well, my company got all this money from this PPP. You know, at this point right now, you know, probably that money's running out. But, you know, a year from now, or a year ago, you know, there was a lot of cash strong businesses because of the PPP and other stimulus. Now their P&L might not have been, but their balance sheet was strong. And if there was opportunity there, people might have been saying, well, you know what, they have all this cash here. There's no way they can use all this. You know, there's an opportunity here. I'm going to steal some, take some, because I have this pressure on me. I have my spouse out of work, and I need to pay the bills. So just with some of the prevention techniques, this is a study that's done by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and they do a survey every 2 years. And they do it. What it is CFEs provide information about all the cases they've been a part of, all the fraud cases. And one of the questions is, well, like, what was the primary weakness observed in your fraud case? And you can see the number one typically is lack of controls, internal controls. And that's why there's opportunity. You can see the override of controls is significant as well. So you have higher level people overriding controls because they have an urgency with something. They need a check cut right now because their vendor's out in the lobby, things like that. Also, the lack of review or oversight is big too, right? So, you know, again, I think every business should be reviewing just their processes at least annually and understanding what's happening in their business office. Did they have personnel changes? Should they add another person? Things like that. It's very important to think about that right now. Questions again, talking about like businesses and what they should be asking themselves. One of the key items here is, do you have a reporting mechanism? Thinking it back to that tip hotline. If someone sees something odd that's happening, how can they report it to someone outside potentially the business office or something? Can they just walk to the ED and say, I'm seeing something weird here, you may want to look into this? Or if they want to be anonymous, a tip hotline is great, right? You just call anonymously and provide something. On our website, HW&Company's website, we do have this interactive checklist. It's in the fraud section of the website.
We'll send it out.
Okay. So I have like just these 7 important best practice controls. So, with check policies or signing policies, making sure you have a policy in place. I would think every business does. One of the things I see with some businesses is once the checks are signed by ED or CFO or whoever, those checks go back to the person that processed the checks. That's a no-no, a significant no-no. I've seen fraud occur because then the checks go back to the person that processes the checks, and they can change the payee on the check after they were signed. And then potentially, I've seen this even go further. That same person gets bank statements in the mail and then changes either the image or something on that check back to the vendor that was previously. And you would think, okay, well, you would think that would get caught at some point, because then the vendor would be calling and saying, where's my money? Well, what happens is the person then the following month cuts a check for the balance forward and the current amount that's owed, right? So they double up on it on the check the following month. And then they do the same thing with another vendor, right? So I've seen that happen a lot. The second item here, so this is, I wouldn't say it's an easy thing, but I think it's a very important where executives could have online access of bank accounts, and I think a lot do. And to cancel checks don't come in the mail anymore. At times they come out images and bank statements, but they're also online. So I think an important control would be someone at an executive level logging in on their bank access, and just, you don't have to look at every canceled check or ACH, but just taking a look at a few. And then the key is then to have either, have a couple questions back to your AP clerk or your accountant, and having a couple questions about a vendor. I don't recognize this vendor. This amount seems pretty high for this vendor, even though it's probably legitimate, because again, it comes back to that perception where that person then knows, well, wait, Mrs. ED is overseeing me right now. I probably shouldn't do anything funny with this. So again, it comes back to that perception piece of it. I think a lot of businesses, most businesses have payroll servicers. They have payroll servicers. They have everyone on direct deposit, hopefully. Again, that's a good control to have. So with vendor lists, so if you have a vendor list online in your system, I think the best practice is to review that periodically, maybe annually, every couple years potentially. If you haven't used a vendor in 5-6 years, why are they on there? That could increase a risk where an AP person or a clerk can then just change that vendor to someone else or to themselves and just cut a check through that. So making sure that you review your vendor list is important. Having reconciliations monthly. So doing reconciling your balance sheet accounts on a monthly basis is very important. Closing your books monthly and annually, very important. So keep doing that. Having budgets. I think hopefully all nonprofits have a budget. They compare their budget to actual on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis. Going back to that again, making sure, not if you're just going to look over the financials and you're good with, even though if they look good, have a few questions back to the accountant. Ask a few things. Well, why, the wages look high this month. Why is that? What's going on here? Oh, we hired somebody new. Okay. All right. Sounds good. things like that. So having a couple questions back to the accountant. So again, having that perception that there's oversight. We talked about, the email, wire transfer fraud, phishing attacks. I talked about just pick up the phone, educate your employees where if they don't really think that this, they think this email is a little fishy, pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, did you just send me an email about wiring this $1,000 amount? So make sure you're doing that. Hopefully everyone. So with that, going back to that item about having online access and reviewing canceled checks, is anyone doing that in their business? I don't know if Matt, do you do here?
You
look at
cancel checks?
Yeah, you take a look at checks and things. Okay, good.
Yes.
So if you're not, maybe consider that overall. Detection. So getting back to what I said earlier about tip hotlines, this statistic shows why you should. So detection. So that this what happens is the fraud already occurred. How is it detected? Who finds it? How is it found? For the most part, about 40%, even in the 2020 survey, over 40%, it was found because of a tip. So someone said something, said, hey, something's going on here. It doesn't look right. So again, having that tip hotline, very important. You can see the other significantly reduced on the other detection features as well.
Why would account reconciliation? That's low because people aren't doing it. It's not because account reconciliation.
They're not finding it.
Oh.
Yeah. They do a reconciliation and maybe they don't dig in enough and they don't find something. But these stats are from that survey. So these are actual fraud cases, right? So they already found the fraud and this is how it's detected. Okay. Accidents higher. Not sure how that's come about. You can see even external audit, 4%. So a lot of my clients, we do a lot of audits for nonprofits, and they say, well, they don't have bank debt. There's really no requirement for an audit. So the only requirement is the board wants it. There's a bylaw. The bylaw says, well, there needs to be an annual audit, which is good. That's fine. That's kind of diligent. But you can see that normally external audits, they don't find fraud.
Because you only get what they give you. You only get what they're willing to give you.
Sure. Yep. And we don't test 100%. External audits do not test 100% of transactions. But we look at we sample transactions. So we're not finding it because we're not sampling 100%. Maybe we're sampling 10%, 5%, right? So if you think your audit is going to detect fraud, it does. That is one of the ways, but you need to have others. You need to have other detection features as well, including a tip hotline, because again, 40% and over 40% of the time, that's how it's detected. Some of the sources, so you can see, obviously, likely, employees 50% of the time, it's an employee, internal employee that's saying something. But you can also see it's outsiders, customers, competitors, vendors. So if you have a tip hotline, you just don't communicate it out to employees. You actually communicate that out to everyone that you touch, everyone that the business touches. I have actually gotten letters in the mail from my clients saying, hey, we have a tip hotline. This is the information here. Here's the phone number. If you know of anything or suspect anything, please call. So I've even gotten those letters. Okay. And I'm just Mr. Auditor or tax person on the outside. So again, if you do have a tip hotline, just don't communicate just to employees, but everyone that you associate with. Again, we talked about who do you touch and all of that. Sort of already talked about this. Also, one of the things here is detection techniques, tips, audits, all of that. However, there's also you can actually do some data mining as well. So you pull in your data, meaning say your general ledger, your financial information into a software, and it runs analysis for you. I wouldn't call this as AI or artificial intelligence. It's more like it's more data analytics. But we do this for our audits. We pull in data. We have a system that we load the data in, and it runs information in the background, and it's based on just purely algorithms that are created that are fraud based, that they say, oh, you know what, there's a risk here because in the description of this journal entry it says something odd. So it looks at all that information, and then it gives you results of that. So I've been telling my clients, we can run this for any business, not just audit clients as well. Or we don't have to run it just at your end, at your audit period time. We can run it periodically as well. There's not much time on our end because we just pull the data in and run it, and then it just produces the results. And then we can just provide that information out to our clients and businesses, and they can run with it if they want to. So again, and just another feature there where you can actually use automation to potentially reduce the risk of fraud that you're having. So tip hotlines, no?
No.
Yeah. How many employees do you have here?
4.
So yeah, I would say I think all businesses should have them. Now, is there a cutoff? I don't know. You know what I mean? But
It's just a use for even outside dealing with our channel
Sure.
members. Would it be beneficial if they have a tip line that covers our membership as well?
Yep. And it doesn't have to be just occupational fraud. It could just be something else. Hey, I'm seeing something weird here. It doesn't have to be someone stealing, right? So if something to consider. Again, if anyone wants that information about that business that we sort of partner with, I can give that information over. I don't think it's very expensive. It might just be based on the number of employees you have, how much cost it is. So something to consider.
Anonymity is a big part of it.
Right.
Like, so setting up a free Gmail account is tips at, or Marion Chamber tips at gmail.com.
Mhm.
Wouldn't necessarily be enough to make somebody want to use that. You have to run it through.
Yeah, I think
Right.
more often than not, you see people that want to be anonymous
So
because they don't want to tip someone that is their friend, right? That they work with, but they're just seeing some weird stuff. Like, this person's coming in. They're an AP clerk, and I don't know. They're starting to drive a really nice car. They're going on a few more vacations a year. Now, there's reasons why, maybe, right? And you probably shouldn't dig into that potentially, but that's the red flag. You're like, well, what's going on there? So instead of driving a Corolla, now they're driving a Mercedes. Like, what's happening here? So things like that like, if you send an email and the person that sent an email, it's like, well, they may not give that tip then, but if it's an anonymous just hotline that they call, potentially would. But just things to think about. So what time we got?
10 minutes.
8 minutes or so. Okay. So just some takeaways as we talked about, educating your employees, making sure that you're doing that not like every 5 years, and probably every year. Educate, have a little sit down, maybe a lunch and learn. Talk to your employees about cyber fraud, cybersecurity, email phishing, all that stuff. What they shouldn't do is very key. Updating policies, again, I think in this environment, maybe you want to take a look at your policies now, because you may want to have some updates to it, like passwords and all that, and timeouts and all of that as well. We talked about internal controls, right? Very important. You have 4 employees here, right? So it's very hard to segregate duties. In that case, you have to have oversight. Like you need to oversee the accounting side for sure, and make sure the accounting, they know that you're looking at the numbers, which you are, sounds like, because you're going online and looking at activity and things like that.
And I really like what you had about the person signs it and then the person cut the checks. signing it goes to a different person.
It goes to a different person to mail them. Yep.
Yeah, so we have it here.
I see that a lot where we're looking at the processes and the sign checks go back to the same person. And I'm just like, ew, I cringe because I've seen fraud occur, happen like that, and significant fraud. And all they do is they move on, they do one vendor 1 month, and they move on to another vendor the next month, and they just pay that vendor twice on the previous month. So it could add up for sure. And we talked about the tip hotlines, very important. So any questions? Any questions that anyone has, or?
Not seeing anything in the chat. If anybody has any, wants to unmute and ask, but I'm not seeing anything pop up in the chat right now.
I would say if you take two things from this session. First thing is, if you're the ED or if you're the president or high level executive, and if you don't look at online activity, bank activity, you should start. Okay, so do that. And it could just be a couple hours a month. It doesn't have to be a full day of looking at all this activity. Just a couple days a month, ask a few questions. And I think that perception back to that person is key. And then the second thing, if you don't have a tip hotline, you want to consider a tip hotline. Those are probably the two takeaways that you'll want to take back to your business. And either if you don't know, ask if you have that or what.
I have a question. Just getting back to the fraud section. You said pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. Obviously, good people do bad things in certain circumstances. How do you have any recommendations to reducing the opportunity? Obviously, you talked about if that person has sole responsibility of the entire process, the opportunity goes up. As you get more people interacting with that process, obviously, it's harder to do it. Do you see that as a best practice?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that oversight. So if you have one person, and a lot of my nonprofits have just one person in accounting, and they just do everything, right? They cut the checks, they reconcile the books, they reconcile the bank account, all of that. And that's okay, right? Because you don't have the resource. A lot of businesses don't have the resources to hire someone else. So if that's the case, as Matt does, you have to have that oversight over that person. And one of those controls could be looking online on bank activity, looking at a few canceled checks, maybe some ACHs, and asking the accountant, hey, can I have the support for this check, or can I have the support for the ACH? And again, it's probably okay, it's legitimate. It's just saying, oh, you know what, I'm taking a look at this stuff. So I think that's probably the key control, is overseeing the accounting. Because I see a lot of businesses, they think the accounting is just something that gets done. And yeah, we get the financials each month. I look at the balance sheet and income statement, and it looks fine, and they throw it in their desk. But it's key that if you're not really spending the time with the budget and just the bank activity and things, then there's an increased risk that potentially that opportunity is more, because then that person, that accountant, then sees that and understands that no one's really overseeing me. I have pressure on me right now. I have to pay these bills. My spouse is out of work. I see an opportunity here. Okay, I'll steal a couple $1,000s now, but I'll pay it back next month once my spouse gets a job. They never pay it back. It just keeps increasing and increasing. And it starts like that. And there's a lot of good people that do that. I have this theory, and I guess I've never read this theory, but I have a theory. I'll try. I have a theory in rationalization. You have the population, right? You have 5% of the population that are always honest. They will be honest no matter what. Like, no matter what pressure is on them, they will be honest and they will not lie, they will not steal. You have 5% of the population, all they do is lie. That's what they do. And there's no, they would probably even answer, we don't know, I don't even know why I do that, but there's always some suspicion there and things like that. So you have the other 5% of the population. And then there's 90% of everyone else that if they're in a certain situation, or if they have enough pressure on them that, hey, I need to put food on the table and my paycheck's not covering that, it's covering the mortgage, and I can't put food on the table for my kids, then they make a bad decision because there's opportunity to do it. And maybe they rationalize saying, well, I'll pay it back next month, but they never do because they can't. So again, we're all good people, but again, good people make bad choices, and you need to make sure that you have enough controls and processes in place to mitigate that as much as you can. Did I answer that?
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you.
Question. Well, Tony, thank you again, as always, and thank you to those that are joining us here in person, and those online, and those watching the recording afterwards. We will share its contact information and the slides and the links that we have from one of the slides and any of the material with you after this presentation is over. So thank you again, and we will see, I believe we'll do this again in 2 months. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the afternoon, everyone.